in, everybody. It's From the Bleachers podcast here on the Fan Sports Network. Caden Formaster here with you today. And I had the opportunity to catch up with Andy Larsen from the Salt Lake Tribune to talk to him about this news going on with the NHL and their possible expansion to Utah. Andy, thank you for joining the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. First time I've been able to talk to you, of course, over the phone, never met you in person, but I will say that I've read a lot of your words. I've read a lot of articles, a lot of tweets, so I feel like I might know you a little bit more than you definitely know me. But tell our listeners a little bit kind of about yourself and what you do in the sports world.
Yeah, I'm currently the Utah Jazz beat writer for the Salt Lake Tribune. I've had a Jazz credential this is actually my 11th season with one. I was at KSL beforehand. Let's see, but it's not just, I guess, Jazz beat writing that I do. I mean, right now it's kind of an all hands on deck situation with our sports department. So been covering MLB expansion a little bit, been covering NHL expansion. I also write a once a week data column since the COVID pandemic. That started with COVID data in 2020 and has kind of since evolved into kind of describing Utah and anything else in terms of data and statistics once a week. So it means that it's kind of a cool, varied job, which I get to write about the things that I love and I'm passionate about, and that obviously includes sports, and I love it. It's a lot of fun.
Tell me about, again, you're a Utah guy. Tell me about kind of the atmosphere of sports in Utah, because I feel like it's a morphing thing, and we'll get into some details, but just the talks of NHL and MLB coming to Utah, specifically Salt Lake City, that's got to be exciting for a guy like you who's in that sports writing world.
For sure. You know, I think, and I've just seen that grow. Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm a Utah guy. Like, during the course of my time here in Utah, right? Like, I mean, I remember the Olympics getting, happening here in 2002 and the kind of excitement about that bid. And obviously recently announced that it looks like we'll be getting them again, kind of that 95% certainty that the International Olympic Committee talks about. And then, the Utah Jazz have always been kind of the bedrock number one professional sports interest, I think, for me and a lot of Utahns. But then you look at kind of how, exciting it is that as Salt Lake and the Wasatch Front especially has moved up in kind of the population rankings and in terms of kind of its economic output rankings and compared to the rest of the United States, it's easier and easier to make the case that Salt Lake City and Utah deserves these major league teams, whether that's Major League Baseball, the National Hockey League. I mean, all of a sudden, arguments that seemed crazy 20 years ago aren't crazy anymore. And in fact, they make a lot of sense. And so we're seeing owners like the Miller family, like the Smith family, be able to make the cases to these leagues that, hey, all of a sudden, yeah, Utah is real. Utah is growing. Utah is a factor in the kind of in the national scale. And it's been really cool to see, and you're right, it's totally an exciting time to cover sports here in Utah.
Now, I want to talk to you about the article that was released yesterday from yourself with the Salt Lake Tribune. I'd read the article talking about the Smith Entertainment Group, that they have put in that formal request that if expansion were to happen, that they are ready for it here in Salt Lake City. Tell me a little bit about that article and some of the details that are inside of that and what that could mean for the future of Utah, specifically with the NHL.
Yeah, it's kind of the formalization of a process that's been going on for the last year or so. Since March, I believe it was, when word first got out that Gary Bettman had dinner with Jazz owner Ryan Smith, and it was pretty clear that was about a potential NHL franchise. Since then, a lot of the kind of work behind the scenes has been underway in terms of Ryan Smith kind of meeting with some of the other NHL owners in terms of trying to get their approval in a Board of Governors meeting, in terms of figuring out what the arena situation would look like. I think the Phoenix Coyotes, or they're now the Arizona Coyotes arena situation, was kind of the first logical thing that, a way that, hey, maybe we can earn a team through relocation. But I think Ryan Smith is more and more becoming increasingly focused on expansion in the last few years, or in the last few months. And In particular, and maybe getting another team along with Atlanta that's building an arena right now. The league would also like to expand to Houston, which doesn't have a market, but an NHL team right now, but is the fourth largest media market in the United States. Quebec City has wanted one for a long time. So there are kind of all these different possibilities in the NHL expansion world. But it does sound like they do want to expand kind of moving forward beyond their current 32 teams. And the Jazz and Ryan Smith want to be the owners of that NHL team. I think large part because of what it allows for them to do and justify here in Utah, which is to build a new arena and a sports and entertainment district around that arena that makes them, more of an economic powerhouse. So, while it wasn't announced where that arena will be placed, I think it's a really kind of interesting opportunity for them to get more, develop the real estate, get more money, and I think Ryan also does really care about Utah and is excited to bring a second kind of major professional pro franchise to Utah.
Talking with Andy Larsen with the Salt Lake Tribune. As you mentioned, placement is kind of an interesting thing, and it's one of those things that I feel like fans, especially fans in northern Utah, I know here in southern Utah it doesn't affect us as much, but especially up in northern Utah, fans say they want that sports downtown experience like we have currently with the Utah Jazz. Some fans are a little bit more okay with putting it out in the suburbs, maybe somewhere in Draper, where some of those, the point of the mountain has kind of been thrown around as a spot. Do you personally feel like there is a go-to destination where maybe where Ryan Smith and the Smith Group is leaning towards?
I think the point of the mountain is more likely at this point. I think it satisfies basically a number of things for them. I think it brings in a Utah County market that Ryan really wants to be tied to. Obviously he's from Utah County and lives there. Silicon Slopes is his professional home. And I think he wants to kind of sell a team to that market as well, kind of open that up a little bit more. I think that's a important to him. Also, if you're developing land and trying to make this, again, the sports and entertainment district, you just have a lot more acreage at the prison site at the point of the mountain where you can kind of make that work. It's going to be more expensive to acquire land in downtown Salt Lake City. And while Salt Lake City officials want to work with Ryan Smith and kind of give them that land or figure out a way to make that work at kind of the Delta Center site or maybe even another site in downtown Salt Lake City, Ryan and his team have not been communicative, with Salt Lake City about that. So, kind of the tea leaves are pointing towards, point of the mountain or points further south in terms of where Ryan would prefer to do this just because of those land costs and kind of the developmental opportunities there.
Who currently owns that land? I'm sure you probably know more than I do. Who currently owns the prison site land? Is that the state?
Yeah, it's the state. So they established what's called the Point of the Mountain Land Authority when they moved the prison away from there and kind of up further near the Salt Lake Airport. Now the Point of the Mountain Land Authority kind of owns and operates that land. And then the way that they're doing it, and they're releasing it in kind of phases of this project, releasing it to different developers on 100-year leases. So it's still kind of permanently owned by the state, but you have this century-long control of whatever you are building that kind of satisfies the developer's interest in this to make a lot of money.
How likely do you think it is that expansion is going to happen? Because, MLB's been in talks a lot longer than the NHL, but specifically talking about the NHL, they just expanded to 32 teams. Are they already in that place where they're saying, let's keep it going, let's keep it rolling, let's keep expanding?
So publicly, Gary Bettman, the NHL commissioner, has been more recently in negative towards that, and saying, hey, we're not currently evaluating expansion. We're at 32 teams. We like the teams we have. We're flattered by the interest, but it's not something we're talking about right now. that's kind of the public message. Privately, you don't have the meetings that you've had with Ryan Smith and some of the other interested cities if you're not interested in expansion. Like they are too far down the road to, really realistically, I think, reject these advances on those terms at this point. Like, I just think that it's pretty clear that NHL owners would be happy to take kind of the fee there, the expansion fee, and split it up amongst themselves. I think a lot of them are looking to replace lost TV revenue from their local regional sports networks. And it's just, at this point, it reads when you talk to everyone like, yeah, actually the NHL does want to expand despite, we haven't seen a league grow past 32 teams in kind of American sports history.
Right. Again, talking with Andy Larsen with Salt Lake Tribune a little bit there about NHL and kind of the expansion. And it's such an interesting thing. And, I know that the MLB, obviously, with the Larry H. Miller Group and Big League Utah has been talked about a lot. What are some of your opinions on that? Do you feel like, in my opinion, I think Salt Lake is super ready for a baseball team, and it just feels like fans are ready for more professional sports. What's your take on baseball?
Yeah, baseball feels like maybe a slightly more natural fit because you don't have the competition from the Utah Jazz during the winter, and you're trying to you're trying to fill days during the summer, which I think is an easier thing to do. I think it's kind of a more laid back sport, which has probably deeper Utah history, thanks to the long run of AAA teams here. Thanks to movies like The Sandlot being filmed in Utah. I think that also looks pretty optimistic, I guess. And some of this is, obviously the Miller family projecting optimism in order to kind of push this forward, sure. But, they have significant land set up at the Power District, which is, if you know Salt Lake at all, it's at North Temple and Redwood Road. It's owned by Rocky Mountain Power, but they've agreed to allow the land to be used for this ballpark. It's in Salt Lake City, and you have kind of broad government support for it. You've got support from Salt Lake City. You've got support from Salt Lake County. The Utah Senate just passed a resolution supporting baseball, something like 26-3. Like you have everything kind of going your way if you're Major League Baseball in terms of having broad support for an expansion team here. And so I also think that happens. They were trying to figure out the Oakland A's situation. That's been largely solved except for where the A's may play, and that may be Salt Lake City for the next 3 years while their arena is being built in Las Vegas. It seems like there's significant progress on the Marlins front as well, on the Tampa Bay Rays front. And that's kind of what everyone's waiting on, and then kind of expansion talks can really begin. I think ultimately what happens is they bring in both Salt Lake and Nashville at the same time in MLB, but I think we're certainly still like realistically probably 5 years away from that happening at least. It's interesting though that the Oakland A's though are really seriously considering playing their home games in Salt Lake, or I guess I should say in Utah in Daybreak at the site of the Miller's new AAA ballpark that would seat about 11,000 people.
Well, 11,000 people, if they fill that stadium, it's more than they were getting anyway at the Coliseum. So I guess it's worth it in the long run.
They got to kind of compare. Are you going to get 11,000 in Daybreak? Are you going to get more than that in Sacramento? Right? You're not comparing it to what you get in Oakland, which is no longer really a feasible option for them.
Right.
But do you play at the Las Vegas AAA ballpark and try to get more? Although the ballpark capacity down there isn't that big. Do you try to make this happen? They're just in Reno is another option. It doesn't seem like they have a ton of great options. So this Daybreak ballpark may be the very best of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk to you real quick about Utah Jazz. Of course, as you mentioned, you are the Utah Jazz beat writer for the Salt Lake Tribune. Jazz on the road today, Washington coming up today. Tell me about your thoughts right now with where the Utah Jazz are at. I know, in my personal opinion, it feels like they are starting to figure things out a little bit more, maybe even hanging around as being a playoff team. Tell me some of your thoughts where they're at right now.
Yeah, I think they looked really hot. They had kind of that 9-1 streak going on last week, and now have lost 3 in a row. And all of a sudden, obviously the team changes, and you can see kind of the weaknesses that weren't there when you were playing well. Clearly, I don't think they're a strong defensive team right now. They gave up the highest professional scoring totals for the New Orleans Pelicans that they've had in franchise history. The other night, that's obviously not good. But, you do actually have a string of winnable games here, too, when you're playing the Wizards tonight, you're playing Charlotte next, and then you get the Nets and the Knicks on this road trip. Those are, I think, winnable games. The Knicks one is going to be the hardest on the second night of that back-to-back, but still very doable. I think, in order to win those games, though, you have to play well, and you have to play much harder than the Jazz have over their last 3. I think that's been Will Hardy's message to the team at shoot-around today in team film sessions is like, look, there are just times where we're not getting back on defense, we're not staying in front of our man, we're not making that extra help in order to stop someone. And he thinks because it's, late January and there's mental fatigue going on, and that totally makes sense. And so he's trying to kind of address that head on and say, hey, you need to kind of be aware that you're mentally fatigued, be aware of what's going on, and fight through it because, these are important games as the Jazz try to stay in those play-in spots. So, yeah, I think it's a really interesting team right now. It's obviously like not a championship contending team by any means, but it's a team that has a lot of pieces that may be on the trade market as well, and maybe that's part of what's going on too. So I think it's been really refreshing for Will to kind of admit that as publicly as he did, and then kind of say, and we need to address it and move forward. And it seemed like the team was pretty positive today at morning shoot-around. They're playing a team that just fired their head coach in the Wizards, so we'll see if they have that extra bit of motivation, but that's what's fun about the NBA is that even through 82 games, there's something new every day.
That's very true. One last question for you, too. Trade deadline is coming up. Give me some names on the Jazz that you feel like are most likely on that trade block.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for the team to move Jordan Clarkson. In particular, New York, since they traded Emmanuel Quickly away in that OG Anunoby trade, they need some bench scoring. And, Clarkson is a pretty clear fit for what they need. They have a pretty clear salary match in Evan Fournier. The Jazz have always wanted Quentin Grimes, and then, Danny Ainge is reportedly asking for another pick on top of that. I think it kind of depends what that pick is. The Knicks have a bunch of kind of iffy picks in the late first round that they could move. They also have way down the road, future unprotected picks that I think Danny Ainge probably would obviously rather have his hands on. So, to me, kind of that's a very possible deal scenario. Beyond that, I think there would be some other teams interested in Clarkson, but you're also looking at Kelly Olynyk as a kind of valued big man that has playoff experience that I think can make a lot of other teams better. I think Chris Dunn is probably someone the Jazz want to keep and is cheap enough and valuable enough that he probably makes more sense in a Jazz uniform than the couple of second-round picks you might get back in return. I don't think Talen Horton-Tucker has any trade value around the league right now. Colin Sexton all of a sudden does have trade value, and yet it may feel like the Jazz maybe want to keep him unless they're bowled over by an offer because he has played so well, right? Like he had 3 30-point scoring nights in a row. That's something, a new level of play that we've seen from Colin Sexton in recent days. So, yeah, I think they're going to be active, but I don't know that it's going to be in service of improving the team this season. They're still very much looking kind of long-term and trying to figure out how to put together the next actually championship contending Jazz team.
That's Andy Larsen, Salt Lake Tribune. Andy, thank you for stopping in, joining me today, and hanging out with us on some Southern Utah radio.
Yeah, of course. Thanks again for having me.
This has been From the Bleachers. Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to follow along with the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and you can always catch the show live on the radio every weekday, 4 to 6 p.m. on the Fan Sports Network. That's 99.5 FM or 95.3 FM in St. George. You could also listen along on thefansportsnetwork.com or, of course, download the Fan Sports Network app. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time.